Alright, hi everyone. Today I'm going to be doing a very late April wrap-up. It's May 22nd when I'm filming this. I was on vacation for the first 2 weeks of May, so I tried to film this beforehand and just didn't get around to it. I actually did reading vlogs for most of the books that I read in April, so if you wanted more detailed thoughts, those would be the place to go. But I know vlogs aren't everyone's thing, so I still wanted to do like a holistic wrap-up of everything I read in the month of April. I started out with 168 books on my physical TBR. I purchased 0 books, and I read or DNF'd 7 books from my physical TBR, so I brought it down to 161, which is the lowest it's been, like, since 2019. So that's exciting. In the month of April, I was trying to read books I think I would love, like 5-star predictions, so I'm just going to go in chronological order of when I read them. Okay, so the first book I read was 1,000 Ships by Natalie Haynes. This is a Greek mythological retelling, and it is centered around the Trojan War from the many perspectives of women. So it's not a chorus of voices in the sense that you're having like a we, our tense. Where you're listening to all of these female voices at once, but it is more that you bounce from perspective to perspective throughout the book. So some of the perspectives you only see once, you get a chapter, and some of the female perspectives kind of keep coming back up. You get the perspectives of goddesses, the perspective of slave women, the perspective of queens. It is really quite a wide array of female perspectives. I've seen a lot of people compare this to The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker, and kind of choose one or the other that they prefer. I think that if you like Greek mythologies, or Greek mythological retellings that are feminist or from new, fresh perspectives that the original texts were not from, I think that they're more complementary than anything, whereas The Silence of the Girls really focuses on Briseis and her specific story. Briseis is like a moment in time in this one, and it's much more a collection of, it's like, you get a moment of her in this book, and you get some of her story, but you don't get everything. And it has, in the sense that I think The Silence of the Girls has more of an impact in the emotions and following one specific character and getting that nice solid character development. I think the 1,000 Ships has more of an impact in like, look at all of these stories of women in different parts of life and see all of the similarities and like see the resounding, like, consistent elements at play. I don't think it'll work for some people as well because I might lack that emotional impact that another book may bring where you're really just focused in and honed in on one person. But I really enjoyed that. It kind of bounced around. It wasn't super chronological. I still found it very easy to follow. And if you like Greek mythological retellings, I would recommend this one. Okay, the next thing I read was Tipping the Velvet by Sarah Waters. This is a story that takes place in Victorian times. You're following a girl. It's kind of a coming of age. You follow this girl who meets a performer, like a male impersonator sort of performer. And she becomes very infatuated with her, starts going to see all of her shows, and the plot kind of spins off from there. And there's 3 very distinct sections of this book. Within each section of the book, you're really focusing on the same protagonist, but different supporting characters or different characters that are surrounding your main character. And tonally, they are very different. I think that I really loved the first part of this. I wasn't expecting that tonal and character shift that occurred in the second part. So I kind of had to like reset as a reader, and then get back into it, and then it happened again. I think that at the end, everything wrapped up really nicely. Character-wise, you're watching like these characters that I wouldn't say are fully likable. I think that's something Sarah Waters does. She creates a sympathetic but slightly unlikable character that's flawed. And you kind of watch them make decisions. And for me, I'm like cringing watching these characters make like just poor decisions over and over and over again. I found the book really interesting as a coming-of-age story. I think that there was a lot of interesting stuff at play with sexuality, which is very upfront on the page. This is a very sexually explicit book, which I was not expecting. But it also, I think, had a lot to say about gender, and I think that you could read different characters as not non-cis, not cis characters, whether or not the character acknowledged it at the time, because this took place during the Victorian age, and I don't. There wasn't a word for what they may have been feeling or going through, so I found that really interesting, and I thought it was a solid read. It definitely wasn't my favorite Sarah Waters book, but she always does a good job. I think that another thing that really works for me specifically in this, that I don't know if it works for other people, is that it's told with like hindsight. So the protagonist is telling you the story, kind of knowing how it ends. So there's like little quips here and there that like kind of not foreshadow, but like a little bit, like let you, there's like an awareness, there's like not a breaking of the fourth wall, but something like similar in terms of a reading experience. The next book I read was Beautiful World, Where Are You? By Sally Rooney. So this was Sally Rooney's third novel, and it is the third book I have read by her. It follows two women who are good friends. I think they met in university, and they are not in the same place physically for most of the book, and they are interacting through letters to each other. So you get kind of like, you get them in their separate love lives interacting with the people around them, the men that they're interested in, and then you get the connection between the two plots, I guess, which is them sending emails to each other. I thought that the connection was, I don't want to say tenuous, but it felt just kind of contrived. Like, it kind of just felt like I knew what the author was attempting to do. Like, it wasn't a subtle connection between the two. It was like, oh, okay, you wanted to write about these people, you wanted to write about these people, you didn't want them together, so now they're writing letters to each other. I think that millennials or people who want to read millennial fiction may have fallen in love with Sally Rooney in some capacity, because there's something like vulnerable about it, her writing, and just something like very realistic to the things that people go through. And after reading this, one has to wonder if it's because she just really is good at portraying her own experience, as opposed to the experience of millennials generally. And I say this because one of your main protagonists is a writer who wrote some books and got some fame and doesn't really know what to do with it. And I'm not saying this is Sally Rooney because I can't know that, but it felt to me like so much self-insertion. I also just, the letters between the two female protagonists, the emails or whatever, were horrendous for me to read, honestly. They were very pretentious. I think that I don't dislike dislikable characters with dislikable opinions, but you didn't get like a gap between someone's opinion because it was an email. So it's like a deluge of their thought process. And if it's a thought process that I have a hard time identifying with or caring about, like I it's not going to keep my interest. I kept wanting to just fast forward through those sections. I personally don't think this is the best Sally Rooney book. I would definitely recommend starting with Conversations with Friends or Normal People, depending on what your interest is. If you were looking for something like more about romance, I would say Normal People, but it's not really a romance. But yeah, I just don't think this is her best work. I found it very disappointing. So then I read Seize the Day by Saul Bellow. I read this like literally in a day, and it's about something taking place over the course of the day, and it's just about some dude who it's like middle-aged white guy, can't get his life together, doesn't have money, so spends all his money, like someone swindles him. I don't know. It's a classic. I had heard, someone had told me I should read it because it was good. I didn't think it was good. I don't really have much to say about it other than like I've read it a month ago and I basically already forgot it. Then I read The Secret Life of Church Ladies by Deesha Philyaw. And this was a short story collection. It kind of all centers around women who have some experience correlation to the church in some capacity. So sometimes the protagonist was an actual churchgoer. Sometimes it was just like the church was part of their family and culture, and sometimes it was something that they had to distance themselves from. There were a lot of topics explored, topics of abuse, topics of sexual violence, of queer identity, of not being accepted in your queer identity. The one that really still stands out to me was Peach Cobbler. I really love that short story. Every single one was very to the point. It got you pretty invested in the characters quickly. They were believable. It caught a good snippet in time. For me, it was a short story collection that worked really well in terms of exploring characters, exploring people, exploring identity, doing a short story collection within the confines of an idea. The Secret Life of Church Ladies, I think, really sums up the collection pretty well. It's thematic, but it's not too thematic where you feel like every single book is about the same people. And while the writing went on, I could tell that they weren't all supposed to take place in the same location. For the most part, it almost felt like all of the people could have been in the same community going to the same church. So I thought it was a solid short story collection if you enjoy those. Then I read The Death of Vivek Oji by Akwaeke Emezi. I did this as a buddy read with Sandy from Miss Reads a Lot. This is another story that is told from hindsight. You find out in the first chapter that Vivek Oji is dead. You find out that they've passed, but you don't really know the circumstances. So you kind of go back in time and you see their life, you see their connections within the community, to their mother, to their cousins, to the girls that they interacted with growing up, to their father. Some of the book is told back in time of their childhood, and others it's really focused around his living family and them, especially his mother, trying to get to the bottom of what happened and facing that grief. And it kind of bounces back and forth chronologically in a way that I found really effective, really smooth, to the point where you're not really realizing you're being shifted in time, but you acknowledge that time has shifted. I found it very seamless. The writing itself, just beautiful. I love when an author kind of connects their writing to the plot in some capacity, and there is this, how Akwaeke Emezi chose to open the book talking about photographs and a life in terms of photographs, and then the end of the book and the reveal in its relation to photographs was just really, really well done. I love when an author can make those connections through different parts of the writing. It was a stylistic choice to start chapter 1 like that. to connect it to later events. I just think Akwaeke Emezi is a really great writer. This is the second book I've read by them. I read Freshwater a few years ago. I'm looking forward to reading more by them. As a reader, I have to think and I have to, do my part, but like they are guiding the process so seamlessly for me, where I'm just getting to like cherry pick things and be like, oh, I see that little piece you left for me. Thank you. It's just, I don't know. I have nothing but great things to say about that reading experience. Next, I read Earthlings by Sayaka Murata. I think that if you have, just generally speaking, if you have any like things that you need to hear trigger warnings for, my channel is never the place to find those. I would recommend going to Storygraph, where people can like list all the trigger warnings out. It's part of the review process. And I don't normally vocalize them, but I will say that you really should check the trigger warnings for Earthlings, because there's a lot going on. So Earthlings it starts out about a girl, and she goes to, she doesn't really have that great of a life, and she goes up into the mountains every summer in Japan to her grandmother's house, and she gets to interact with her favorite cousin, and they're young, they're like under the age of 10 or 11, and they think that they're like boyfriend girlfriend. We'll leave that. We'll leave that there. And then you start to see just a lot of really horrible things that go on with her. Like sexual assault of a child is in here on the page. It's disturbing. And you're really in her head. It's so hard to describe the plot of this book because there's so much that goes on. So you get this chunk when she's young, and then you get a chunk when she's older, in her 30s. That time jump was hard for me. I think that it didn't feel very seamless. I almost wish it would have done something where you started out when they were in their the protagonist was in their 30s and kind of just had these flashbacks. Because it was like, we're a child. Suddenly, okay, now we're an adult, total change of scenery, but we were still getting some flashbacks to childhood, so I felt like it could have been like weaved together a bit nicer from a writing perspective. From a plot perspective, it was bonkers. I really don't know how else to describe it. Your characters are something. Like, your protagonist is strange. All of the people that she surrounds her with are characters. Like, whenever you've probably had that experience where you meet someone and you're like, oh, you're an interesting human. I haven't experienced anyone quite like you before. I feel like most people are right here, and like maybe you're like kind of coming in like this. And for me, reading this book, you really did have to suspend your disbelief of the plot. Like, I was just kind of laughing and chuckling at some of the things happening. I was like, sure, that's what's happening. Okay. But I do question if it's even about the plot and and whatnot, and it's more about the themes. And so while this book was bonkers, while I was like, what the hell am I reading right now? I was thinking constantly about things outside of the reading experience. I was thinking about society. I was thinking about culture. I was thinking about how Eastern and Western culture might differ. I was thinking about how she was using like these potentially magical elements to structure her novel in a way that you were allowed to question humanity a little bit more. I was thinking about how a lot of the time what she was talking about was really on the nose, and then I questioned if it actually was. So this book is niche. I would not recommend this widely. I think that if you're a really big theme reader, it would be good for you. I think that if you are okay with some absurdism, it would be good. And I think that if you read the trigger warnings and you're okay with it, then I would potentially recommend, but again, I would not recommend this book widely. Then I read Milk Fed by Melissa Broder. I went between liking and hating this book, sometimes between paragraphs. So it is about a woman who very much has an eating disorder. It's in first person. So eating disorder, disordered eating. If you have an issue with that, don't read this book. And she's going through life and going to her therapist and meeting a woman that she becomes interested in, and dealing with food this whole time, and commenting on food and commenting on people's weight and commenting on how fat they are, and it's a lot. I almost DNF'd this book I don't know how many times. I felt similarly to when I read her debut, The Pisces, where I absolutely hated the protagonist and didn't really care for what the book was trying to say. I think that it's interesting because the Pisces Milk-Fed has a lot to say about diet culture, and celebrity culture, and the appearance of people, and like what we choose to care about. But how it went about it seems like voyeuristic, and I'm saying this even having just finished talking about the Earthlings. I don't know, I guess I just don't like Melissa Broder's writing. I don't like who she chooses to use as the avenue to tell her story, and also, like, Milk-Fed is just a bad title for this. It is so far off from what this book is about that it felt, like, intentionally misleading. There were moments I enjoyed, definitely, and I was intrigued enough to be like, okay, where the hell is this gonna take me? But I think I might have to call it quits with Melissa Broder at this point. I don't think I can really highly recommend this. It just felt gross reading it. I don't know how else to put it. Okay, the next thing I finished was The Silent Companions by Laura Purcell. This is a haunted house horror novel that takes place in Victorian England. It has things to say about like gender roles and female hysteria. I thought that plot-wise this was fine. It kept me interested. I wanted to know what was coming next. I got through to the end. But I think that where this novel kind of missed the mark a little bit was you're in a haunted old house. Like, where are the atmospheric descriptions? I was really hoping for a little bit more of a sinister atmosphere within the writing, something maybe more like creepy tonally when you're describing the house. I think I wanted the novel to be a little bit more descriptive. And I also think that character-wise, things were happening so quickly, you know, there was kind of like a whodunit thing going on, that we really could have gotten a little bit more backstory on characters. So I feel like I rarely say this, but this book would have benefited from like 30 more pages at least. Like, just some more character backstory, getting me to care about people, bulking up the atmosphere, really like upping the notches on how creepy, and like I wanted this to be a little bit more gothic feeling. I think that was what the intention was, but it just didn't totally land with me. Regardless, if you like horror, if you like haunted house stories, I think this is solid, but I can't say I've read a lot of those, so I'm not really comparing against a whole slew of haunted house stories. Okay, the last book I read was In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. This is a memoir. It's surrounding Carmen Maria Machado, her abusive queer relationship that she was in. So this is written in second person. So you are Carmen Maria Machado, and she's telling you, you did this, your abuser kind of did this. It was a really unique take on a memoir where it forced you to empathize because it was telling you everything was happening to you itself. I found it successful. And I think that part of the success was the way the novel was written. You start out at the beginning of the relationship, and you see the progression, and you can really empathize with how someone would stay when they are suffering at the hands of an abuser. You were very much privy to the emotional and verbal manipulation and the gaslighting that would occur, and that did occur to her. And I liked how it was kind of, she used her experience and kind of discussed how there's not a lot of literature about like queer or lesbian relationships that do experience domestic violence. She has some conversations about how sometimes they can be in media portrayed as only good, and like you can't see the bad side of a queer relationship. The one thing that kept pulling me out of the narrative were the quips about pop culture. She would use like a movie or an episode of something to describe a situation and compare it to her situation. And while I found that well done, I personally don't want someone to describe an episode of a show to me. And like, even in my real life, like, do you guys ever have that happen where someone's like, hey, have you ever seen this movie? And you go, no. And then they're like, oh my God, it's so good, you have to see it. And then they tell you the whole plot, so you like don't have to see it. And you're like, cool, like, could have just watched it and probably enjoyed it more. That's kind of how I felt in those moments. It didn't take away from the experience, but it's just something I wanted to point out. I think that's all I read for the month, so I don't think this was as short as I thought it would be, but I hope everyone had a good reading month in April, and I guess May, since this is going up towards like the very end of May. But anyways, that's all I got, so happy reading.